of the game. Reed or producer Eamon, Daniel, or technical director, somebody, correct me if I'm wrong about this. I think this is the final slate of 2021. Do we have another one of these before next year, as it were?
No, this is the last one. So
Man.
I guess you and I have to get our New Year's Eve hats on.
We did not come prepared.
Clark action. So if you can get going, Seacrest, if we can do that, then let's go. You have the sweater on though, for sure.
I do, yeah. The holiday spirit is in full effect. This can be a Festivus to the people watching. I don't care. You have any grievances about the way that we've been doing things on the slate? By all means, shout them out. Comments, questions, concerns, thoughts, whatever it is, get them in. We'll respond to that stuff as long as it's appropriate, as long as it's funny. You can roast us all you want. Just be funny and don't curse, and we'll read it. It's pretty much that basic. But let's get into the Niners and the Titans, Reed. And there are a lot of interesting plays. Obviously, like I mentioned, there's the star power element. There's the name recognition element. Julio Jones sort of falls into both those categories as he is coming back now. Played last week, left early, hamstring injury, but he's available in the short turnaround. A.J. Brown obviously is coming back. First game for him since week 11. There is no Elijah Mitchell on the Niners side. So another heavy dose of Jeff Wilson Jr. But I think just overarching, you can get into this as well with San Fran favored by 3 in the DK Sportsbook going into this thing in Tennessee is we have a meaningful game. We got a red hot Niners team that is 8-6, winners of 5 out of 6, could just as easily be 6 in a row had they completed a fourth quarter comeback. This is a team that's right there in the heart of the NFC playoff race, and the Titans tied for the second seed percentage, or technically on a tiebreaker, they're third, but tied with New England at 9-5. They are struggling though. They have lost 3 out of their last 4, and they got a whole bunch of 8-6 teams right behind them. So this is important on both sides.
Yeah, it is. And Tennessee, even though they're getting some guys back, they're also losing some players in the offensive line. Taylor Lewan is out. Robert Saffold is out. No, Roger Saffold. Robert or Roger? Saffold is out.
Not a skilled player. Fantasy people don't care.
Yeah, exactly. But it makes a big difference, especially when when you talked about the 49ers who are playing well. Yeah, Roger. Thank you. Amen.
I think he was just saying over and out. I don't think he was.
No. And like this is a big matchup for Tennessee, because if they can win and they're at home, right? They're getting 3.5 points at home. Then this gets them back on track. And this is a team that is hanging on to every grasp to stay and to stake their position in the AFC playoffs. This one is tough, because I think if we had at least one of those guys in Saffold or Luan, I'd be a little bit more comfortable. But Nick Bosa is playing out of his mind right now. Like he's playing extremely well. And that kind of scares me when you talk about, them moving the ball efficiently. AJ Brown is back. That's massive. Julio Jones is healthy, which is usually not the case. That's massive. But the injuries on the offensive line, that does scare me a little bit. So this one, I'd probably stay away. But if I'm taking a side, I actually think Tennessee right now, you're bottom at their low, right? They could have won in Pittsburgh, but they just couldn't get it done in the fourth quarter. And you got a team too that just gets up. Vrabel, you know this better than most. Vrabel gets his guys going, and when they're on prime time, it wasn't too long ago, this team went on a stretch of beating 4 of the top playoff team caliber teams in a row earlier this season. Not to say that they have the same players, obviously, because a lot of them have injured, but Tennessee they have the ability to attack San Francisco's deficiencies now with AJ Brown and Julio Jones in. On the other side, right, Tennessee can defend San Francisco's run game fairly well, because they've been a defensive, not a powerhouse, but they've played defense well against the run. So if I had to pick a side, I'd probably go Tennessee with the points. And like this total is kind of creeping up a little bit. I'd probably side to the over, because AJ Brown and Julio Jones are in. I think it's still a little bit low, but again, both of those offensive linemen out does want me to stay away from this game.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess I would be inclined, and again, I mentioned the line was 3. It's moved to 3.5 just in the last several minutes. So it tells you which way, obviously, the money's going right now, because we haven't had any key personnel changes going into this thing with kickoff just a few hours away. I would
Yep.
be inclined to go with San Francisco at -3.5. The over, I'm also intrigued by at 45.5. The thing is, I guess I go back to this, and this sort of, it includes both sportsbook when we get the player props, but also DFS as well. And you can go after the $1 million tonight with one of the contests available to you in the DraftKings lobby. Is, you just look at the way guys have been performing of late. You start at the quarterback position. Jimmy Garoppolo, he's played very, very well, and in sort of that game manager reputation that he has. In fact, going back over the last 8 weeks, I was looking at it earlier, he is the best passer rating in the entire NFL, second only to Aaron Rodgers. Thing is, he's not put up a lot of dynamic stats. He hasn't even reached 300 passing yards in his last half dozen games. He does have a good touchdown to interception ratio. Again, plays into why he's playing so well. It's 10-3. He's got a couple of rushing scores as well. Ryan Tannehill has played very, very poorly, and it's easy to look at it, Reed, and attribute that to the fact that for the last couple of weeks, he was basically throwing to the two of us out there and didn't have Derrick Henry at his disposal either, obviously, despite how well they are still running. But the numbers going back for Ryan Tannehill here, twice in the last 6 games, he has topped 200 passing yards, which is generally easy in today's NFL. 4 touchdown passes, another 4 on the ground, which just makes their running game all sorts of confusing. And he has the 7 interceptions as well. So before even getting into just some of the skill guys and considering who you might be looking at, again, daily fantasy, are either of these QBs appealing to you? Or are you trying to load up in the other skill positions and maybe fade the quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, the contrarian play is obviously Tannehill, but he's got 13 turnovers in the last, 3 or 4 games. And that's more. I think that's one more than the, previous 9, essentially 9 or 10 games, and how many turnovers that this offense has. And a lot of that is attributed to Ryan Tannehill fumbling the ball. And that's why the offensive line is such a big thing, is because Tannehill's fumbling the ball, most likely coming from the pressures, that are coming from him on the defensive side. Right? Like if he's fumbling, it's not necessarily, he's running the ball quite a bit, but he's also part of that is probably because he's running away from the pressure that's coming towards him. So that's a contrarian play. I lean towards Jimmy G, just because of the correlation between George Kittle, Debo Samuel, probably more so Kittle and IU, because Samuel is just not catching balls at all. He's great out of the backfield, but Jimmy G is probably the guy that I do want. Having said that, though, just in primetime games, he's good straight up, but he's just not someone that has that ceiling type of game. He can, he's capable, but you kind of see his game logs. You kind of want to keep him at that mid-range of 25 to 32 pass attempts. Really, getting up to 41 is kind of a misnomer. Against Cincinnati, obviously that took a little bit extra time, but the one thing that scares me about Koff is that the 49ers are 3.5-point favorites on the road. That is a ton of points on the road. Take away what 49ers have done, right? And look, in the last, 7 or 8 games, they've won 6. That's an impressive, an impressive game log, but you're buying them at a premium right now. Like that 3.5 points, that's buying them at a premium. The 49ers are at a all-time high in terms of the sentiment on them, and Tennessee's at an all-time low. If that's the case, then and I feel that Tennessee can put up some points at home. That's why I lean a little bit more towards Jimmy G. If Tennessee is up, Dontrell Hilliard, right? Donta Foreman, these guys are going to get the ball a lot. And that's why I kind of like Jimmy G in this spot, because you have correlation. You have the better skill players too that are quote unquote healthier, not necessarily better on a whole, but they're just healthier right now in Debo Samuel and George Kittle. AJ Brown being back is massive, but this is his first game back in 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, first game since week 11 for him. I want to just, because I know we've got the screen share up for the people, I want to show you guys some of the stuff that I'm thinking about. George Kittle obviously has been, he was a little quieter last week. The prior 2 weeks, he was outrageous. Over his last 3 in general, 425 receiving yards. It's far and away the most in the NFL over these last 3. He's averaging, look at it, 11 targets per game. He's catching basically 9 per game. He's been outrageous, and he's got the 3 touchdowns as well. He projects to be the highest owned player. He projects to be the highest scoring player. He projects to be the highest captain player. It's all about George Kittle. You are definitely doing something contrarian today, Reed, if you are opting to fade him, obviously. Yeah. But what I think is, really a more interesting discussion is between Kittle, the quarterbacks, obviously, Wilson, Brown, these are the bigger names, and Debo Samuel. if you're trying to decide who you want to fade, because you can't roster everybody, it's not exactly San Fran or like Tampa Bay and Kansas City, an example I use all the time, or Tampa when it's actually healthy. But you have a lot of expensive guys. You can't fit everybody in. Is Debo Samuel, because you were just talking about it, with the 6 rushing touchdowns in his last 5 games and only a dozen total targets in that span, the fact that he's more of a running back, more of a jet sweep guy at this point in time than he is a receiver, and it's Brandon Ayuk, out there getting targeted by Jimmy Garoppolo, among others. Is Debo actually the one that you're more likely to fade tonight?
Yeah, on a showdown slate, absolutely, because you're shooting for the upside. You're shooting for the ceiling games. It's one. On a main slate, no, you can't, right? Because he's being utilized in so many different ways, like Cordell Patterson. That's just not a positive EV play. But on a main slate, yeah, I definitely would. And on top of that, he's the most expensive player. He's the most expensive guy on the slate. So it's an easy fade for me when you're talking about Debo Samuel, because that rushing caps his upside. He's just not catching any balls. The rushing, although it's nice to see, and you're seeing a safe floor, you're seeing the 20-point games, 12, the 18, which is nice. You're just not seeing a lot of that come out, and receiving is so important in PPR. Right. It's massively important in PPR. That's why you want the receiving backs as opposed to the running wide receivers, is because you get all of those receptions and yards. If he's not doing that, that doesn't allow for the 30 to 40, 40-point game that you kind of need from Debo at his price tag. Like, you need the 30-point game, as a decent floor at his price tag. And if that's the case, then I'm probably going to stay away from Debo in my captain spot, because you're probably going to see a lot of people think that just because he rushes and you see those touchdowns, it's going to be a solid play. And while he's a good player, I'd probably fade him just because the upside is capped.
So I'm going to ask you this question for 2 reasons. One, as a transition, and also just because it makes sense here with a showdown slate, which is when you look at, again, everyone gets their projections from different places. What I'm looking at here, the highest projected captain percentages, you have Debo at about 12%. You have Jeff Wilson Jr. at about 12%. You have George Kittle at about 14-15%. And then you could also include the 2 quarterbacks at right around 9-10% each. So those, that's your holy grail of projected captains for tonight, unless you want to go contrarian and go AJ Brown, which is semi-contrarian, or go crazy like I've talked to Reed about in the past with a kicker or something like that. But are you more apt to try and save some money with either a Brown coming off the injury and IR, or Wilson after what he did last week, and knowing, again, there's no Mitchell coming back, but obviously Debo is gonna vulture some opportunities seemingly from him? Who are you most likely to go with in the captain spot?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm playing cash, it has to be Kittle in my mind. But if I'm not, I actually like AJ Brown, just because, like, if he's healthy enough to play, right, then and they're still in the playoff race. AJ Brown and the Tennessee Titans are still in the playoff race. He's someone that has the upside to have those 30, like you just see it right there in week 7 and 8. He has the upside to get you 30 to 35 points at his price tag. If he's going to be like the numbers that you were saying, 8-9% at captain, like, that's massive. And so the contrarian captain plays, I think, are going to be in Tennessee. He's probably my favorite. And then Donta Foreman is the other one, right? If there's a game that, and again, this is not wild to think this outcome could potentially happen, is that Tennessee is up in this game, and Garoppolo is turnover worthy. He's been turnover worthy. Sure. In his or he's had turnover worthy passes in his career historically. If that's the case, and Vrabel gets an exotic blitzes, we know the pressure that this defensive line can create. Then Donta Foreman can be that guy that's essentially sits on the ball and gets you those 15 to 17 touches. And if he gets you a couple of touchdowns, if he gets you 1 touchdown, that's massive leverage against the field. And on top of that, you can get some of those other guys up top. So AJ Brown is probably my favorite, just because everyone's going to be like, I don't know who's coming back. There's a story you can say that I don't know. San Francisco is decent at getting pressure on the QB. Their secondary is decimated by injury. Like, they're bringing out 2nd, 3rd string practice squad players. AJ Brown at 75%, or potentially whatever he's at 100, and absolutely torch the secondary.
This is sort of a it's not exactly. I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. We sort of have a shared backfield situation on both teams. Obviously, like when it was Derrick Henry, it was all Derrick Henry. When it was Raheem Mostert, it was basically all Raheem Mostert, even Elijah Mitchell. But now with San Fran, even though it's largely Jeff Wilson Jr., you can't ignore the Debo Samuel factor, like we talked about before. And the guys that you're talking about here with Tennessee, Deontay Foreman, obviously Dontrell Hilliard as well. You wouldn't believe it, but it's a small sample size. Tennessee has actually run the ball better, more effectively, more efficiently, more in totality with these guys than it did with Derrick Henry. I don't know, attribute that to whatever you want to attribute to. But if you're building out a lineup here for this showdown and you're looking for a value play, are you hedging your bets at all? Like, are you looking for a value running back? Are you pairing, Foreman and Hilliard together just to kind of cover your bases there?
Yeah, I mean, if I had Hilliard in a lineup, I probably wouldn't correlate. Just because if I believe, or no, excuse me, Foreman, if I believe he's worthy enough, especially be in the captain spot, then that's the exact opposite game script of why Hilliard would do well, right? Hilliard is the pass catching back, and you could essentially say that for Jeremy McNichols as well. But I personally like Dontrell Hilliard much more because last week he got 6 targets, 9 attempts, in that game against the Steelers. He seems to be that guy. Right, he's $2,800 in the flex, 42 in the captain spot. I would not captain Dontrell Hilliard, but I would definitely, have him in my lineup in the flex spot. I mean, 9 attempts, 49 yards, and then 6 targets and 4 receptions. It's massive. Like if he puts a score on that board at 16 points, right, you've 8x'd. If he has the same line, right, if we think Tennessee is going to be down, which the market is saying that they will, then this is extreme value in my opinion, because they're saying, well, there's 3 running backs. I'm not going to choose any of them. I'm just going to stack the San Francisco side and maybe go naked with like AJ Brown. No, like I think Dontrell Hilliard can absolutely be that guy. He's got the most pop in that backfield. Foreman's the guy that you want if you're trying to salt away the lead. But Dontrell Hilliard is probably my favorite value play at 2,800.
Is there anyone cheaper that you have any interest in, or is that about as inexpensive as you're going to go? Like, could you make a case for, I want to make sure I have the flex salaries up to the people. Could you make a case for an Anthony Ferkser at $2,600? There are no other tight end options on Tennessee that would even be remotely appealing. Do you want to go down to a Hasty or a use check there if you believe that San Fran's just going to, run, especially as the game moves along? I don't think there's anyone sub 1K. So, those are probably the guys that you're looking at.
Yeah, I like Juszczyk on some player props, but I mean, $1,800, it's fine. Like if you want to play the best the best fullback in the NFL, Pro Bowl fullback, Kyle Juszczyk, never will be able to spell his last name correctly ever.
Why try?
And then the tight ends, like Ferkser is probably the guy, right, that you would have to go with. Like Pruitt is not someone that I would have any faith in. But again, Dontrell Hilliard at 2,800 is probably the one where you just want to, stay safe with it because you can tell yourself a story that makes sense. Ferkser, look, I mean, 2 targets, 5 targets in the last couple of games, 7 targets total. That's not really a lot, right? He's got.
Well, let's also remember no Brown. That's
exactly. No Brown as well, right? So again, could he get in the end zone? Absolutely. Like any of these guys get in the end zone? Absolutely. But I'd probably stick with the lowest going to Hilliard.
Well, in the interest of time, because I want to make sure we have time to hit on different things, let's go back to the DK Sportsbook, look at some of the player props and which ones have jumped out at you so far. If we make the move to, I think rushing and receiving props probably a logical place to start. We talked about all the rushing options. You could see it right here on the board. There's a zillion of them.
Yeah, Ryan Tannehill. No, actually Jimmy Garoppolo. Look, we always talk about it, right?
Yeah. 3.5. What the hell?
Over 3.5 and at -105. Like that is one run. That is one scramble for 4 yards. That's all you need to do, Jimmy. I think he's done this. I think he's 1 in 5 hitting his rushing over his rushing prop. But this is so low. And we saw Mac Jones against this team. Mac Jones, who arguably is probably a little bit faster than Jimmy G, but around the same type of quarterback, get 11 yards rushing. Right? Those are 2 scramble plays. If Nick Bosa is coming at you, or excuse me, if the Tennessee front 4 is coming at you, which they can, right? They can put a lot of pressure on them, internally. then I think Jimmy G at over 3.5 rushing yards is definitely in play. It's not going to be fun watching because he hardly runs, but I'm banking on that scramble getting 4 yards. And if I'm going somewhere else, I mentioned Kyle Juszczyk. I think his receiving prop is 8.5 yards. Like,
It
and I
is 9.5 now.
9.5. Okay, yeah, 9.5. That is wildly low for someone who's hit his over prop more than he's hit the under. And on top of that, he's gotten a few games, maybe 4 games, with over 40 receiving yards. Granted, you had some players out in those games, but Jimmy G is going to get the ball to Juszczyk. Juszczyk is going to have plays for him. At 9.5 receiving yards, I think that's way too low, right? And San Francisco has given up receptions to the opposing running backs, fullbacks. No one's going to think of the fullback. So I think that number is too low. Like it's crazy because you see his game logs, like 30 yards, 50 yards, 40 yards. And then you see this 9.5 and minus, what was it? It jumped on me a little bit. Whatever the payout is.
9.5 at minus 110.
Yeah, that's not a lot at all. So, again, not sexy because you're getting Garoppolo and Juszczyk on your player props. But I like those.
Well, people probably just saw me scrolling on their screen here, and the reason for it, and I wanted to make sure that my eyes weren't missing something. This just speaks to how messed up it is, the way the Niners are using Debo Samuel, who, again, is a wide receiver, folks. He's got a rushing prop at 32.5 yards. He does not even have a receiving prop right now in terms of yardage because he has been transformed into the jet sweep guy.
Yeah. I mean, why not though, right? Because it's working. I mean, it's working for the offense. No one can figure it out. Kind of what was happening with Cordell Patterson with the Falcons earlier in the season. There's no real package that you can, account for. If you put a linebacker on him, he's too fast. If you put a DB on him, he's too big, right? So he has that mismatch. The same with tight ends and Kittle. Like they have those mismatches that you can't really guard them if they're the athletic type of tight ends. That's what Debo Samuel is doing. Like you can't really defend Debo right now. Having said that, personally, like I said, I don't like the upside because the ceiling isn't there. So I like in the props, what happens if they switch? What happens if they say, okay, you're going to play more receiver now, right? Then his rushing prop goes completely out the window.
What are you most comfortable with here between the bigger names, meaning AJ Brown, 56.5? We'll include, for the sake of him being, I guess, the top wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk at 48.5, George Kittle, 73.5, and then name recognition will include Julio Jones, 38.5.
I mean, probably Kittle at 73.5, which is wild. But because of what he's doing, he's been fantastic. And Jayon Brown, their linebacker, Tennessee's linebacker, is giving up, I think, 88% completion to the opposing tight ends. That's the 5th best on the entire slate for tight end matchups. So, no, I don't think it's 5th best. Excuse me, that's another article that I'm writing. That's for Dalton Schultz. A little teaser for Sundays. That's the Sundays article. Dalton Schultz is 5th best on the slate. But at any rate, look, like George Kittle at 88% completion, for Jayon Brown, that's pretty dang good, right? I mean, if he's going to get anywhere near the targets that he's getting, then that seems pretty low. But again, I like taking these single digit props. You see Dontrell Hilliard and his, receiving prop, it's not that high at all, right? Donta Foreman, his receiving prop, not that high at all. So those are the players that I want. Like Donta Foreman's 9.5 and Hilliard is 7.5. Like that's not large at all. So I want those single digit ones that in one play you could win your bet.
As you were saying that, Foreman just jumped to 10.5. The people they're listening. They're listening, Reed. Yeah. Hilliard's the one that I like best, and I think you can make an easy case for both those two, like you just did. Yeah. But Hilliard of the two, because as we know, Foreman's just a little bit less involved in the passing game than Hilliard is. But it's again, that can be one catch, like you said, and takes care of business right there. Let's see. I just wanted to see if Debo was involved in the rushing and receiving yards. He's not. So you have Jeff Wilson there, though, at 74.5. What do you think of that number?
He doesn't catch any balls. So he's got to do it all on the ground, right? Like he's just not the guy that catches a lot of passes out of the backfield. It's Juszczyk, it's Debo, it's everybody else, but it's not really Jeff Wilson. So there's not a lot of positive predictors on someone like Jeff Wilson for combined. Having said that, though, like we always talk about, the combo yards and receiving, those pay out on the overs much more than any other major prop category this season. because you can get it, in a myriad of ways. You can get it multiple ways. And then also the interceptions have gone over, like passing interceptions. Well, that's the only type of interception, but interceptions have gone over their props at the highest clip of any major prop in the since week 1.
I know how bad Ryan Tannehill's been. I outlined the numbers off the top of the show. That being said, Reed, Julio available, AJ Brown back, 219.5. It just dropped in the last second. It was 220.5, 219.5. And now it's down to 218.5. I feel like I'm doing a reverse auction. Came off the board. It's right, 218.5 for Ryan Tannehill. Book it, baby. I'm going over that. I don't know why it's dropping. Did we get news? Is Schefter out there tweeting? Is somebody getting ruled out? I like 218.5. I'd go over that for Ryan Tannehill. The man's getting disrespected.
Yeah, but 93 passing in week 12 against the Patriots, 191 against the Jaguars, and then 153 against the Steelers. But like you mentioned, right, not a lot of people to pass it to. So he's getting some players back. Yeah, I mean, the last time he hit this over was 323 against the Texans in week 11. So he has that upside.
Yeah, and I'm not even looking for him to get a bonus, like 250 yards. I think that's very attainable for him.
Yeah, and look, and because it correlates too with the bad San Francisco secondary, right? And if Tannehill, if you believe that they're going to be down, then this number, while it's going the right way for you at 218.5, is actually very viable.
Could you make a case for, just because we've been talking about the inefficiencies of these two offenses or ineffectiveness of the quarterbacks in some ways anyway, can you make a case because it is showdown for either of these defenses?
Probably not.
I mean, I wouldn't. I just wanted to know if you could.
Yeah. I mean, if I had to pick, right, it'd probably be San Francisco, but I think Tennessee I think Tennessee is live to win this outright. At home, obviously the points are much better. So take the 3.5 because you're getting a nice dog, a dog at home, a home dog and Tennessee has been good. Tennessee has been good covering. So plus 3.5, I think that's definitely viable. But if you want to do money line, I don't mind it at all. Plus 155. And if that's the case, right, I don't necessarily believe that Tennessee's defense is one that I would want to attack unless they're playing Jacksonville. Unless Tennessee is playing Jacksonville, it's not a defense that I want to attack.
We've got 5 or so minutes left before we get out of here. Reed, may as well acknowledge the rest of what is going on in the NFL this week. Mm-hmm. It is not just the Niners and Titans tonight, even though that is the most immediate, obviously. You have a couple of games on Saturday, on Christmas Day. Browns at the Packers, the Colts in Arizona against the Cardinals. Don't expect snow in that one. What's your outlook on these two games?
Yeah, I like the Packers in a teaser leg, get them down to 1.5. We've seen teams kind of backdoor cover. We saw the Ravens almost do what they did. The Ravens have now screwed me out of 2 bets in their fourth quarter last series of the game. So I'm not very keen on the Ravens, but I think the Packers, I'd rather tease them down just because if you're getting some guys back for Cleveland, and it hinges on Myles Garrett, if he's active, if Baker Mayfield can play, if Kareem Hunt can play, if you get those guys back, this number at 7.5 is a little worrisome for the Packers, even though they're the way better team. The Cardinals, this one is interesting, Koff, is that the Colts are the better team right now. They are. But you're paying that premium on the Colts, right? You saw them beat the Patriots. Yep. We've seen them play well. Jonathan Taylor is getting all this MVP publicity, which is warranted. Mm-hmm. He's playing out of his mind. And the Cardinals right now are kind of on a downward spiral. Oh, it's doing the same thing as they did last year. They're at home. James Conner looks like he can potentially play. He's saying it's a pain management thing. Even though D-Hop is out, the Colts don't really bring a lot of pressure. They don't bring a lot of pressure. They don't bring a lot of blitzes. And the Cardinals and Kyler, potentially, if that's the case, can do some damage here. So I think right now the value is on the Cardinals. For me, it's a stay away spot, but I do think that the Cardinals do present the better value on in this game, but I wouldn't be surprised, right, if they win this outright, especially at home.
What jumps out to you on Sunday with some of these lopsided spreads that we have and not very many high point totals?
Yeah, staying away from the Jets, Jaguars. Staying away from Seattle, Chicago. Please don't bet the 2 bad teams, 2 poorly coached teams. Sorry, Seahawks and Bears fans. This one's going to kind of surprise people, probably. It's the Lions. All they do, Koff, is cover. There are three or four teams that are better than the Lions at covering, and it's the Packers, the Patriots, all the teams that you would think of that are covering who are good are the only teams ahead of the Detroit Lions. The Lions are like 9-5 ATS this season. It's wild. Look, Jared Goff might not be playing in this game. That hurts. Swift could potentially be playing in this game, and Matt Ryan should do well. But 6 points for the Falcons, give me a break. They do not deserve close to a touchdown against a team who's just all they do is cover. And apparently now, they've increased their win total by 100%. They beat the Arizona Cardinals. I don't see this as a letdown spot, and they don't need to win. But 6 points for a team that's covering at a pretty impressive clip is something that I'm interested in. And that's probably about it right now. I'd probably involve the Chiefs in a teaser with the Packers if I had to. But probably staying away from these other ones. And probably the last one, Koff, is probably the Bengals. Bengals right now against the Ravens. You remember last time these two teams met, the Ravens absolutely, they laid an egg and the Bengals put up like 40 plus points on them. Now they don't have anybody in their secondary for the Ravens. I don't think that they're going to do what they did against the Green Bay Packers. The Cincinnati Bengals just match up so much better against the Ravens. And they just don't, like, if Tyler Huntley is still in there, I think you got enough tape on this guy in back-to-back weeks that he's got one read. It's Mark Andrews. And if Mark Andrews isn't open, he's running the ball. So if you're Cincinnati, like, you got some decent tape against a division foe, I really like Cincinnati in this, and I really like the over.
Yeah, once again, Lamar Jackson out of practice today, remains sidelined, that right ankle injury. So as Ian Rappaport referred to him, Snoop Huntley, looking like the guy once again, as you were just talking about. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I guess in our final couple moments here I can't remember a time, and players have talked about this too, Reed, recently. I can't remember a time in the NFL in recent years where there's been as much parity as there is right now, with all these teams that are 7-7 all the way up, obviously. So most of the vast majority of the league is still in playoff contention with just a few weeks left. So as that gets you thinking about team futures, pulling that up here on the DK Sportsbook, your favorite right now to win the Super Bowl, unsurprisingly, well, Chiefs and Packers are actually both plus 450. So that's your favorite Super Bowl matchup at this moment. But who are you liking the odds on? Is there anybody with longer odds that stands out to you?
We talked about the Colts when they were at 35. I think that was time to take that bet. They might be out of it though. Like, depending on how things shake out, they might not even make the playoffs, which would be a travesty because I do think they're a better playoff team than most. Right now, I think probably the market's pretty mature right now. But boy, you could see the Eagles making a run at plus 8,000. That's a team that can get in the playoffs and can really bother some people. I don't trust Jalen Hurts that much, so I'd probably stay away from that. And the Rams, I'm going to stick with the Rams. They were my preseason pick at plus 1,000. They got the most balanced team in terms of defense and offense right now. Stafford is playing out of his mind. Cooper Kupp is playing out of his mind. They might get Cam Akers back for the playoffs. That would be massive. And Aaron Donald's the best defensive player in the league right now. So if you match that all together at plus 1,000, that's probably the spot that I would go to. Having said that, Dallas has a really easy road to one of the top seeds in the NFC. Like, they don't play anybody. So Dallas at plus 1,200, I don't know how much they're gonna rely on their historic playoff foe of just not winning in the playoffs since 1999. But that's an interesting team as well. The defense that's getting healthy at the right time, a really good run game, massive receivers on the outside in terms of their speed and their way to break open a game, and a quarterback that is more than capable of making a long run in the playoffs. But it's probably going to go through Green Bay, and we know with Dallas, they're not a good road team. They're not a good team, potentially as good as if they're in Jerry's world.
Well, folks, speaking of long runs, it's been a long year. So our group, our crew, our production team, on camera and certainly more so off, has earned a break. So we are largely paring down, shutting down over the course of the next week or so, taking into the new year, enjoying a nice extended holiday break. You will still have plenty of stuff going on, but the slate will not be with you for the next week. So as we talked about earlier, this is the final edition of the slate here for DraftKings of 2021. We will return strong, fast, furious, all of it in 2022. Fear not. The Thursday editions, the sports shows continue, but we want to thank our entire team. To list them all, we'd get cut off, we'd run out of time, but those with us today: producer Eamon, of course Daniel, our technical director, and he is Reed T. Fowler. I'm Adam Kaufman. We thank you much, obviously, for hanging out here with us. Best of luck with your bets, set your lineups, and all of it. We thank you for hanging out with us as you do each and every day, for the sweat in the mornings, the slate in the afternoons, and everything in between as well. So enjoy Thursday night football, the weekend, happy, healthy holidays, and all of that. Reed, it's been a pleasure, my friend. We'll do it again soon.
All right, bud. Take it easy.